do that. I'll say, got it. All right, so a few more people coming on, but we'll just start. It is really an honor for me to introduce Lianna Nixon. And now Lianna is with the CIRES Outreach and Education Office, or Education and Outreach, I should call it. She works with Anna Gold's group. I think a lot of us know Anna Gold, but what Lianna's going to tell us all about is storytelling in science and creating stories that stick, that how to draw your audience into the story you want to tell about your science and what makes a compelling story, storyboarding, responsible storytelling strategies. All of us are into science, often are trying to tell the story about our science, get people excited about the science, and this is the sort of thing that the Lianna does. Now, she's done a lot of things in the past. She worked for with National Geographic, photographers, et cetera, specializes in stories in the polar regions, the Alaskan territory, and the American West. And I found out that she was with also the Mosaic expedition and was there for what, 5 months on the ship or something like that. So I guess a lot of time for collecting stories and probably telling them. So without further ado, Lianna, I give you the podium.
Thank you, Mark, for handing off that podium and great introduction. I'm going to share my screen with you all, but before I do that, I'm just going to share a link for a Padlet, which is an interactive program that we're going to be using just for some activities. So hang on here. All right. Great, thanks everybody. So as Mark has introduced me, my name is Lianna Nixon, and today I'm going to talk about creating stories that stick. And so what we're going to go through a little bit here is thinking about stories that we have already found that are compelling and interesting to us. And we're going to go through a little bit of an icebreaker to kind of get ourselves ready to really talk about stories. We're then going to talk about the foundations and building blocks of what makes a good story in these pieces. And they do relate a lot to science, and so we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about engagement techniques, especially if we are giving presentation formats. There are things that you can actually implement into your talks that increase engagement, whether it's with public outreach or K through 12 classrooms. And then we're going to talk about some responsible storytelling practices and frameworks. And what this really explores is how when we include stakeholders into our stories and think about science and society, we need to really think about how we're responsibly sharing that information and thinking about others. So this is based on a resource that CIRES E&O has co-developed called Making Presentations That Stick. It's more about the nitty-gritty of building a good PowerPoint presentation. So this is just a resource I'll highly recommend you check out if you need a little bit more information on what makes a good presentation and those kinds of logistics. So I've been working in conservation photography for about 10 years now and filmmaking for about 6. And I'm really interested in stories that intersect people and planet. And I use stunning visuals and art science narratives to communicate that. So photography and film as a way to communicate science. I also do a lot of activism related storytelling. And so I use counter narrative frameworks, really challenging dominant narratives by using other people's or helping raise other people's voices and different dialogues in certain spheres. So why do we need storytelling in science? I think many of you are here because you may know that storytelling in science is important, and there are infinite reasons why it is. But these are just some of my favorite ones that I want to go through. So when we use storytelling as a method of communication, it can create more impact. It can help inspire, educate, motivate, and change people's minds, depending on what perspectives and formats we're doing with our storytelling. Storytelling is also one of the oldest ways that we as a human species have transferred knowledge. We synthesize and retell this information from generation to generation or community to community. And so this is something that, we really understand, and and continue to do. Using visuals and other methods within storytelling, because it's this oldest way of transferring knowledge, is a little bit more engaging. It can also help us tackle really complex and abstract notions. Often when we live in a world where science or different agendas can be a little bit polarizing within the public sphere, storytelling and art can allow us to openly approach those subjects rather than coming in with certain perspectives. Science in itself is also a story, right? We're trying to understand the world around us. So from our human genome to outer space, the way that science goes through understanding and using empirical based evidence to really untangle our ways of knowing, it is story as well. And then finally, storytelling is a really fantastic tool for community work. It allows us to share knowledge, right? That transfer of knowledge. It helps us expand our knowledge and other ways of knowing when we're working with communities through story. And it helps us maintain not just our way of knowing, but cultural practices and anything in policy and practice. So we're going to start off with that warm-up icebreaker with our Padlet that I have in the Zoom chat. So I want us to take a couple minutes to think about a nonfiction story, whether it's an article, a TV show, a podcast, and what about that piece that you have recently found interesting or have read has been memorable, impact, or relevant to you. So I'm going to open up our Padlet here, and I'll reshare that link again for us to go through it. But I just put an example on here. NPR's Consider This podcast with William Shatner going to space and having the overview effect. That was something that was very interesting to me. So let's take about 5 minutes here.
Sorry, Lianna, can you just clarify, in these 5 minutes, we go to Padlet and you want us to answer the question?
Yeah, to put in a nonfiction story or resource to share.
And you want us to put it where?
In the Padlet in the icebreaker section.
Under the icebreaker section.
Yeah. So you just press that plus button and then it'll allow you to publish. You could put a subject or a link, whatever you want. Thank you for that clarifying question.
Yeah.
All right, we're starting to get some in. And if people do want to share out while we're just taking our time to go through this, that would be amazing to talk about why maybe that piece was interesting for you.
Lianna, I think I'm failing at the technology here. What,
No worries. You can share out if you want instead, if it's just not working for you.
well, in the published thing, am I supposed to put the same title in each one and then write something below, or?
So you can just keep it as a subject or write
Okay.
over the caption. So whatever you want. Yes, sorry, I kind of just threw you all in here on this.
For a minute, Lianna, I was trying to do it through your screen share and not like seeing the Padlet, and I forgot what screen I was on after I came back, and I was like trying to hit the plus button in your screen share.
Oh no. I feel like that's a development that will happen with Zoom one day, right? Like it's going to allow people to interact in some way.
I was like, why can't I open it? And then, oh, I need to go to the actual Padlet.
Well, all of these stories are super interesting, and I will say I can export this into either a PDF or something, and then you will all have this. So I like Padlet because it's a fun way to interact and actually collect and save that information, then share it with you all later. So I'm looking really forward to checking all of these out. I have seen though, the bear at the end of the tunnel. That was really cool. Awesome here. So we'll take one more minute to wrap up, but does anybody want to share out anything that they put out here and why?
This is Twyla. I put in the Threshold podcast, which actually now has many seasons. And I haven't listened to the most recent one, but they are really good at showing multiple perspectives. And it's always, stories of people and narratives and the sounds and everything that make you feel transported.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to check that one out. But yeah, the narrative work, it can be so powerful. And I like that you bring up soundscapes as well. That's a really great way to immerse people in totally different environments that they might not normally be able to navigate. All right, here. For those of you kind of finishing up your responses, just post them when you can. I'm going to continue on with our slideshow here. So a lot of these that we have all put in are wonderful, compelling stories, and probably what all of them have is these important story blocks. And though basic as they may seem, they can hold a lot of power and help us really be able to flesh out stories and experiment with how they can be engaging or change different ways that we can make a compelling story. So these story blocks start off with our exposition, which is where we create context and setting the scene. So a lot of these images that you've seen so far from the Arctic and are from the Mosaic expedition. And so when creating stories about Mosaic, we of course talked about the North Pole regions, really trying to situate people in understanding this kind of place and why, people are going up there, really being able to set that scene. The inciting incident is our story's movement. So we come from our first starting point and start this upward motion. And this is where we can give more context, where we introduce certain ideas. Maybe it's just the basics foundations of your science. Maybe it's your story and how you got involved in your work and field. Those are actually really helpful stories, especially for youth to hear. It inspires them to become more excited about science, is hearing people's personal experiences. And that's within our inciting incident. Our actions are the meat of the story. They can be multiple events, varying perspectives or voices that help us really flesh out what we are trying to accomplish in communicating. So for Mosaic, we had all these different teams that were studying different aspects of the Arctic climate. And so what we did essentially for a lot of these was put them into these teams, although that did simplify a lot of complex things that were happening. It allowed people to be able to have those tangible pieces of action that allowed them to dig deeper into that story. We have our climax where we have either a resolution where actions are resolved. Maybe this is where if you were having a presentation about previous field work and findings, you could share that, important messages, or even key stories. Perhaps that's your most important or transformative piece that you want to communicate. And then finally, we have our conclusion or a final outcome here. And this is where, as we have built up this whole momentum, this upward mountain, and as we're decreasing into our final point, we might have some loose ends that we need to tie up. This is also where we return back to our exposition and our inciting incident. We go back to themes if we're kind of thinking about different themes that we want to talk to, call to actions, or any takeaways. A call to action is perhaps you work with CIRES E&O and you have a curriculum based on something that you collaborated on, and you want people to go to that, or go to a journal piece that you have written, or just even going to NSIDC and learning more about your work as well as your team and peers. So thinking about engagement techniques is also a great way to help deliver that story. And I have here just some ones that I think are really helpful in different PowerPoint presentations or talking presentations. And they can work for you based on your storytelling style or your communication style, but also for your audience. So when we think about how we tell our stories, we have to always think about who are we telling this for, what is it about, and what do we want to accomplish? So photos and videos are great for public outreach and K through 12 classrooms. They can, and also infographics or graphics. They're some of the most engaging things. It's cheesy, but seeing is believing. We also can use analogies or universal themes to help break down complex events or narratives. We can also use actual engaging activities. So this Padlet, for example, that we just did is a great way to get people to think about your content, think about your themes that you want to go over. And Jamboard is also great if you have Google Suite for that, and both are free. There's also trivia that you could do, just some question answer kind of things. Kids love that. They get very competitive over that, but it is a lot of fun. And you can also add on hands-on activities if it's in person. Perhaps it's just bringing in a piece of gear or something like that to show others about how you do your science. Those kinds of things are really interesting, or even clothes to wear in the polar regions is very fascinating for people and understanding that human experience behind science. So for just the photo and video stuff, because that is my bread and butter here, I have a little basic shot list about what moments are really engaging and capturing. I know it can be hard when we're in the field or in the lab, taking that moment to be like, this is a great time to take a photo. But even things of just, a peer in the field or in the lab doing work can really help engage people so that they can actually really visualize what it's like to do what you do and to do the work that you want to accomplish. Landscapes are really great. Many of us here work with climate and polar region areas, and honestly, people are so fascinated, and it seems otherworldly in a way for a lot of people who don't navigate those regions. So the more that they can see it, the more that they can try to create a connection to it, even though they live thousands of miles away. Adding something to a landscape. So like little person, big landscape, or little instrument, big landscape. When I do polar bear photography, I love little bear, big landscape kind of stuff. That really helps show the vast and expanse of where you're working, and helps create that context. Using perspective with your camera is really interesting too. The height that you take photos at actually can change the way that we engage with a certain subject. So if we're using drone footage or taking a photo very, very high up from normal height, we're creating this distance, which helps us, with a setting, and creating that context, but we're still moved quite far away from that subject. So that's like a really great way, using this vast landscape, higher up perspective, farther away perspective, to kind of set people in. When we take photos at normal height, it becomes a little bit more casual and allows us to easily interact. We're on the same plane, viewer and storyteller or scientist, right? So those photos are great in helping us really kind of see the perspective from person to person. And then if you take photos really low to the ground or really close up, these macro shots, it makes the world feel really small, but then it also helps you focus in a very intimate way with what you are looking at. So let's say you're in Colorado and working out in the backcountry, and you just take some beautiful pictures of flowers, and then you have this landscape that's larger than life. It's going to really help us focus on flower foreground, but everything around us is really big. And that's actually a great perspective for kids as well, because that's how they view the world, right? So another thing is capturing characteristics of your science. So right here I have Dr. Ali Fong photographed here with her sea ice core, and she actually made me stop taking photos after I took this one, because she wanted me to listen to the sea ice and that very satisfying sound of when the water leaves the brine channels. It sounds like Rice Krispies. I'm sure some of you have had that experience or heard that sound. And I did get that on film, and that was really powerful, of just creating this characteristic of sea ice that I don't think a lot of people would expect. So whether it's through photo or through film, capturing the sounds, the tastes, yes, like people licking ice. That was something I learned on Mosaic that people did as a quick way to tell if it's from saltwater based or freshwater ice. Those kinds of things help add to what is, your subject, what is sea ice. Then another thing that I think is very compelling are humanizing moments. When we are taking on the perspective and responsibility and role as storyteller, there is some vulnerability that you ask of people when they consent to being in your story. Even you, in your own way, you are consenting to this vulnerable human aspect of storytelling. And those are really important moments. And they can actually help us better connect people in, what it's like to be a scientist. For example, Esther Horvath, one of her best documented photos of Mosaic was when one of the crew members was the person to cut hair for other scientists. And this very humanizing moment, though not fully capturing science or lab work in that, really shows what it is like to be a field researcher, and those kinds of things that, and taking care of yourself and how important that is, just being a person and scientist. And then finally, when we work on different projects for a long time, being able to show changes where things, for example, in the Southwest regions of the United States, the Colorado River has been experiencing mega drought. And for many of the residents there, they have been seeing water in different areas and also water disappearing in other areas. So showing these changes, whether they're seasonal or even longer periods of time of, of drought are also very powerful and maybe showing what you were trying to capture. So I have another Padlet question here. We'll take a couple minutes to think about it, but we just went over a bunch of engagement techniques and storyboarding, so we're gonna just allow ourselves to absorb that a little bit. But which engagement technique do you gravitate towards and why? And how do you think you can accomplish this, whether it's just signing up for a Padlet question or Padlet account, or maybe thinking about bringing out your iPhone more times when you're in the field. So we'll take a moment to do that. Oh, sorry, you guys. So once again, that's this guy here, the third one. What kinds of engagement and techniques interest you? And also please feel free to share out if you want, if anything, or if you have any questions about any engagement techniques right now, I'd be happy to answer them. The interviewing people and recording stories, response here is awesome. I think that is the coolest way to gain numerous perspectives. A CIRES Education Outreach program that is happening right now, We Are Water, has I think hundreds of recordings from people in the Southwest region talking about water, and it's been really cool work. They have all sorts of podcasts in from people in different regions, and it's really helped us understand a lot of place-based learning and water and how that's changed. I do agree on photography. I think it's best, but I might be very biased. I also like this point here of doing short polls or interactive elements that are not just break rooms. I think that something that we've talked about at CIRES E&O is the exhaustion of Zoom workshops and meetings, and how it could feel really repetitive and draining. And so those little ways of interacting without maybe having to do a breakout room is a little bit better and can keep people, paying more attention. Awesome. I do like art. We didn't really talk about art, but art is a fantastic way. Having people draw out certain things it can be really powerful. For example, Amy Lorne, who's on the Mosaic expedition as well, she had everybody draw their science on this Arctic landscape, and it was a very collaborative, beautiful piece that helped to actually people think about the interactions between other teams that they might not have when they all drew it out and then made lines to different connected drawings.
Lianna, I had a question for you related to your last slide. Can I ask?
Absolutely.
When you said that you were taking a picture of taking pictures of the scientist holding the ice core sample.
Yeah.
and she told you to stop so you could listen to the ice. I wondered how much you choose between, like, when you're out in the field taking photographs, how much do you decide to pose to get the shot you want or have people pose for you versus just what comes naturally? And how do you decide to find that balance?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends on your photography style. So I don't like posing people. Posing people is a very documentary and journalistic perspective. You could see that in a lot of different, like Esther Horvath is like one that does a lot of posing. And it's beautiful visuals and compelling work, but sometimes it can feel stagnant in some ways when you pose people because there's not that motion that carries through. I think it all depends on what the product is going to be. So for example, if you have a article, NSIDC sending out their newsletter and they're like, we need a really nice photo of somebody in front of their instrument or doing something specific, that then is a posing shot. Versus if you're just working and taking a moment and looking over at your peer and they're kind of doing something cool and just taking that, that's another thing too. It all depends on your product and it depends on your style. I found that sometimes posing people can be really, it could be really daunting or intimidating, asking somebody to stop and to redo a movement or something like that too. And normally people are very okay with it. If you're a photographer that's out there helping capture science and work, and if it's like somebody that you work with, of course, they're going to be okay with it. But sometimes asking maybe somebody you don't know a lot can be very interesting. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to give us one more minute here and then we'll continue on. Yeah, any trainings on these engagement techniques, that is something I hope to develop one day. Because there's not a lot out there on how to do that or thinking about a shot list and taking good photos. It's a lot of training your own brain and thinking about those moments as like storytelling pieces. All right, it looks like our minute is up here. So for those of you still posting, continue to post, but we are going to move on here. Oh, and I love this photo. It's just like a very humanizing, silly moment. This is Katrine. She decided that she wanted to leave her own footprint on the sea ice. And so rather than the very same boots that kind of go around the sea ice, she decided to take her shoes off and actually leave her own footprint. So that was fun. Now I'm going to shift gears here because and talk about responsible storytelling. And this is something that when we decide to capture moments, in particular, when we are thinking about people and science and society, responsible storytelling is super important. Photography and filmmaking, especially, can be incredibly extractive to communities. And that has happened historically, especially when we think about dominant narrative and frameworks around people and places, and also climate injustices. That has had a huge history of extractive storytelling. So responsible storytelling is the answer. When we are responsible and ethical in how we capture moments and how we share out moments about our science when they involve people, they can actually create more powerful stories, and they can create respect and trust, not only with your viewers and your audience, but within the participants, stakeholders, and community members that are involved in your work. Responsible storytelling is also very sustainable because it involves active participation, necessary stakeholders. We think about that vulnerability and humanizing again, and when we build that trust with people, people are actually more willing to share out more. People are more willing then to allow you to continue capturing those moments because they feel that you are honoring their story. Responsible storytelling also is about capturing your own biases. And this is really hard sometimes when you don't have a sounding board or another person to really talk with, but we all have a background and we all have a perspective and we all have a view of a certain story or our work. And sometimes we may not see our own biases or other sides of the story. So the engagement piece that somebody said about capturing personal stories is a great way to capture and not have biases because you can capture numerous perspectives. Asking your questions of why am I telling this story? How does my own perspective and biases impact this story? Whose voices are being centered in this, or what is being centered in this? Who is not being heard, and also not perpetuating harmful narratives and stereotypes, thinking about those things as well, can really help you check your bias. So I am currently working on a resource actually about this for understanding your biases when it comes to science communication. So I will let you know when that comes out if you are interested in how to check your biases. Responsible storytelling also grapples with compressing complex knowledge without, compromising authenticity of your narrative. Oftentimes when we have really big stories and stories that involve people and their livelihoods and other necessary stakeholders, it's within this very intricate, complex web of other things. And sometimes we have to limit what we decide to tell our stories on. So becoming more specific in how we're capturing things. For example, I'm working on a project in the Southwest region, mostly on Monument Valley, and working with residents there on water shortages and water accessibility. Now, it's a much bigger issue across the Navajo Nation. About 30% of people do not have access to running water in their own homes. But when you look at the different regions that cover that, the different whether it's urban or rural populations, it can get really complex. So narrowing down a story to a certain population, to a very specific niche or subject can actually really help without compromise, making it a simpler story, but not compromising authenticity. Responsible storytelling, just like with your bias check, makes you think about power dynamics. When we are storytellers, we have power on how stories are being told and put out into the world. And so really being thoughtful on, not exploiting people, not oversharing, allowing people, if they give you interviews, for example, to be able to redact or change information based on how comfortable they are. I've had this happen even on Mosaic, where people feel that they weren't able to fully communicate their ideas, and then they get uncomfortable after you do that interview, but allowing people beforehand to know that they have a say in how their words and their image are being represented really helps them feel more empowered in their story. And then responsible storytelling is adaptable. We come in with an idea of a specific story. Maybe we have this kind of more agenda on how we want to capture certain things, but understanding that stories change, people will give you an interview and then they say, just kidding, something like that. But being okay with that and understanding that whatever you're trying to show and communicate has to be dynamic. So one of my favorite perspectives and frameworks to use, this is something that we use a lot in the School of Education, is counter-narrative. And this is our bias check framework here. It's a way that we intentionally craft stories and challenge dominant assumptions of power relationships and identities. So, science in itself can have these power dynamics, right? And so when we talk with other people and perspectives, that can really help us, change these dominant narratives and assumptions around science. So when we use counter narrative, we can incorporate other forms of knowledge. NNA, for example, the Navigating New Arctic Office, works intimately with Indigenous people and putting and collaborating Indigenous knowledge into science. And that has been very powerful to see how that dynamic helps us understand more about the world around us. Counter narrative is also about using accessible language. A huge challenge in a lot of science communication is that there are a lot of big words and a lot of acronyms. And this is an issue of accessibility, and often science can be hidden behind a lot of different degrees and doors of knowledge. So when we think about accessible language, 6th grade level speech is what we typically use for public outreach. This is about the level that most photojournalists use. And if we're going to use any more complex words, we build up that knowledge set, whether it's defining the word or whether it's using a more basic concept of it. Counter narrative is also creating capacity for stakeholders and community members to be actively involved. So that's that responsible storytelling that we have there, and just allowing other people who might not often be heard in different environments and narratives have that chance to speak. It's also about co-authorship. That's something I really love about science in itself, and storytellers have a really hard time with, is this idea of co-authorship. You all in your process of publishing and working on projects is always peer reviewed. So I think that this concept is often lost in other areas, especially in storytelling and artistry. So I think you guys have that covered, but it's very important when we tell stories to have that co-authorship. And yeah, always counter narrative is about that bias check, always questioning everything you do every step of the way. So I wanted to share with you a project that I've been doing. This is the Southwest story called Water Holds Memory. Pictured here is Dr. Tommy Rock, who studies the environmental factors of uranium in water and in water tables in the Southwest, mostly by his home in the Navajo Nation. And he actually, a lot of his work implemented water collection cisterns for people who have to go hours a day to haul water. And it helped to actually fix a lot of problems that for community members in Monument Valley Navajo Tribal Park. They still have to haul water, but they don't have to spend 3 hours a day to haul water versus 1. So this is a video I'm going to share with you. And it is responsible because it's a co-production of knowledge, working with the residents and elders and community stakeholders. It's a counter narrative because of the dynamics between the park, Navajo Nation regulations, and the residents. And it intersects environmental and climate sciences within it.
We're living in a park. It's a tribal park. It goes way back to my ancestors.
My mom used to say, I used to climb on top of the mesas and look for water up on top of the rocks. And these are the rocks that has big holes on top, and it look like it's big swimming holes. I noticed that nowadays that a lot of my people will be living closer to a spring, so they will have water to haul it back and for their drinking water. It's about, let me see, about I would say maybe 3.5 miles.
With my mom, she's getting old, and so a lot of the things that I worry about now is the water. I really want people to know that, yes, this is a sacred place. This is where one day I want my niece to live here. I want her to live peacefully to where she's going to just live a good life here.
All right, guys. Okay, so that was just an example, and it's being implemented with more science around water and mega drought, especially with the water, the rivers that are supposed to feed a lot of these springs that are in the area, such as the San Juan River and the Colorado River. But we're going to go to the Padlet and just kind of go back to what has stuck with you. Any final thoughts on storytelling and talking about your science? Please let me know. And we can also do question and answer now as well.
Thank you, Lianna. I think I'll just say I feel after your presentation, I feel inspired to take more and better photos.
Oh, thank you. Awesome. That makes me so happy. Like it's always my goal to, make people excited about telling stories and sharing, because what you all do is so cool. And I think people want that stuff. They want that content. And it's just always fun to see that.
And as you know, we all like snow and ice around here.
Yes. It's the best. So
Okay. Other questions or anything like that for Lianna? This has been very illuminating.
thank you. I'm going to stop the share for now so that I can see everybody's faces or your screens, but yes. And I will put the that YouTube video in the chat here.
Cool. See if anyone's got questions. You can just put them in the chat here. And yeah, I see. Yes, I agree with Matt. Or you can probably shout them out if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is Florence, and I just want to say that this one slide of yours was particularly helpful to me because we talk a lot about declining sea ice, and I have a lot of charts that show declining sea ice, and it's really a kind of a downer of a story. So, in presenting the data, especially in the beginning, it was all about, the catchphrase was data to information to knowledge, right? So it's like, how do we present the data in a way that conveys information so that people can know? But what's helpful for me was to see that there's a lot of different ways to engage people behind just that piece of compressing information the way we do a lot of times with our charts. So thank you for that. It's going to be hard to actually make some of those pieces work, but I really appreciate the suggestions.
I have a question in terms of like the changing Arctic and the changing sea ice and all this.
Yeah.
In terms of telling a story, what would you say is the hardest part of a story to get across, so that people understand what is really happening?
Yeah. I often think of when it comes to the changing face of the Arctic, it really is the understanding of certain foundational climate change concepts. So people think that climate change is exclusive to global warming, which it's not. Global warming is a product of climate change, and often, I've gotten so many occasions about any Arctic communications. They're like, "Well, it just snowed in Texas, so it must not be that bad." And I think people have a hard time grasping on more complex phenomena of like, well, it's, this polar vortex that is happening. There's these pockets that come out. So it's instability within our climate and the changing Arctic. So that's something that is hard, is trying to understand what concepts people have in their heads about Arctic and climate change and being able to build up proper foundations for that. One of my favorite things to talk about for climate change is the albedo effect, because that can be so easily felt by wearing either a black t-shirt or a white t-shirt on a hot day. And just being able to break down those concepts so that people don't confuse them is hard.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, similar to me, what I often get is that, it's the idea, it just snowed in Waco or whatnot, and that's it's an intentional ploy, often by those who do not really want to see what is happening.
Yes, it absolutely is. And that's where I think art and the cliche of seeing is believing is really powerful. And hearing those personal stories, when we were at the North Pole during Mosaic, I was next to Brian Blomquist at CIRES, and when we were there, he was like, "I've never seen such rotten sea ice at the North Pole, and I've been up here a few times doing research." To hear that was, that was a heartstring puller for me. Anyways, Twyla, you're up.
Yeah, I was curious if you could talk too maybe about storytelling that is not about telling about being in the field, that is like maybe more processes of science or collaborations of science, or things that aren't just pictures and elements of when we're out and about.
Yes, yeah, that could especially, I think that process and different processes, going through data, those kinds of things can actually be interesting. Twyla, something that I've really enjoyed, at least from Q Greenland, one of my favorite things is the screen captures of showing how data has changed based on over time when you manipulate it. That's really interesting. Science on a Sphere, for example, has a lot of success with engagement because of how their infographics and data show those changes. It's very satisfying, I would say. But when it comes to process, when it comes to writing papers, when it comes to, doing all the nitty-gritty stuff beforehand, showing what a day in the life is too is quite interesting. I think people are rather curious about what those kind of mundane tasks relating to science really look like. And that is a reality for most of the time, right? It's not always going into the field. It's, you know, in the lab or, you know, at the computer, going through data, talking people through it, in just little tiny short videos. I think people do like that stuff.
Ooh. I just wanted to know, we use Science on a Sphere in my class. It's an introductory Earth science class, and it's one of the labs. It's Science on a Sphere. The students really like it.
Yeah, it's awesome. And they just came out with the new update for the Mobile Explorer, and they have some cool curriculum pieces even for younger kids to interact with it. And they get to use their electronics, like which is great as well.
Mark, you're muted.
Oops, I was going to say, are there any more questions for Lianna? I know we're coming up against our time, but we still got a couple of minutes.
I just wondered if you could, Lianna, you had those 2 links at the beginning of your presentation, and I wondered if you could share those.
I absolutely can. And I'll email you, Mistia, with all the other links and stuff, so that's more organized. But the 2 links I just put in was for making presentations that stick. So that's more for PowerPoint presentation work.
Great, thank you. I'll put that in the event on the calendar so people have it.
Cool.
And Lianna, will you share your entire presentation?
Yes, I absolutely can. I can do that right now too.
Thank you.
If it wants me to do it. Otherwise I'll ask Mistia to put it in the
Yeah, just ask Misty.
That works too.
Make sure again. Yeah, okay. All right, well, I guess we're out of time here, but this has been brilliant. So really, thanks, Lianna, and thanks for all you do, for us as, within the outreach, with CIRES here. It's really very, very cool stuff. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure getting to talk with you all, and look forward to maybe seeing you around in Colorado.
So a virtual round of applause. Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you.